Welcome to the Art Bar Poetry Series and readings of selected poems from Mud Ajar by the author and poet Hiram Larew and Mud Ajar's audiobook narrator, T.A. Niles.
Well, greetings, everyone. My name is Hiram Larew, and I want to thank Margaret and Daphne, Brett, and the rest of the Art Bar team for hosting this reading, this discussion today. I was lucky enough to read at the Art Bar, about 7 years ago. And so I'm very honored to circle back to read there again, this time in what I call the Zoomosphere with a key colleague. Let me begin with just a little bit of a background. My most recent collection, Mud Ajar, was published in September 2021 by Atmosphere Press. Since then, it's been a pure delight to offer up the poems in Mud Ajar in a variety of online spots. And it has been a very, very special joy during the publication process to work with narrator, vocal magician, T.A. Niles, as he has recorded all of the poems in the collection to produce the audiobook version of Mud Ajar. And to further shake things up, be forewarned, between the set of poems, we're going to pause for just a few minutes and discuss them. Where do these poems come from, or what's their intent? We'll also briefly explore the overall production of the collection. That's all to say, I describe this event as a poetry reading and discussion. So away we go. T.A.?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Hiram, and the glowing sentiments, of course. I'm not sure that Hiram needs much introduction, because I'm sure you know that Hiram is an award-winning poet whose work appears in a plethora of poetry anthologies and magazines, and who has five books of poetry under his grinning belt. That's a private joke there, which includes Mud Ajar. There's no doubt about Hiram's talent, nor his commitment to poetry, to poets, and to using poetry to enhance lives. I'm sure that he's proud of his unique work, but I suspect that he may be even prouder to have founded the internationally acclaimed Poetry X Hunger Initiative, a project that encourages poets to summon their muses to the cause of the hungry. To that end, Hiram was instrumental in getting poetry included in 2021's World Food Day, including the introduction and moderation of the poetry segment of the event. I could speak volumes that drip accolades, but I think you'd probably prefer if we let the offspring of Hiram's creative genius speak for themselves through our reverent voices.
T.A., goodness. I'm gonna see if we can have you come on the road.
I'd love to.
Wonderful, and I do appreciate it. And yes, indeed, I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to get started on Poetry X Hunger. Let me introduce Mr. T.A. Niles. He says he's a nascent audiobook narrator, but I think he's a very versed, experienced audiobook narrator because he has 6 titles in his portfolio that he has narrated, of which Mud Ajar is the latest and most recent. Thus far, he has narrated fiction, nonfiction, a spiritual booklet, a memoir, and now his best work thus far, I think, a book of poetry. And he has written a play titled Attitude of Gratitude, which was recently performed in Arizona.
Thanks so much again, Hiram. And without further ado, perhaps we should have you jump right in and read a few for us, if you don't mind.
Sure. This first poem was published initially in Ireland's Head Stuff journal. It's titled After All. For some reason, you think in a different way when you go outside. It doesn't make any difference if you're in the city or far up in the hills. It doesn't matter if there is time or not, or if it's spring or fall, or what you've had to eat. When you step outside from being in, even for just a minute, you think of bigger things, like how to convince someone of what's important after they're gone, or how to get to 300 years from now by hitchhiking, or no matter what kind of moon's up there, how you should strive to become more and more like butter. I think because that poem references the moon, it was reprinted in the 2022 lunar calendar by Luna Press. This next piece was first published in Clock Radio magazine. And it's about that wonderful mystery we call appreciation. Uphill. If asked what the most beautiful sight on earth is, I'd probably say that it's the feeling of a blanket half covering bare shoulders in spring, with a drizzling rain outside. That is surely one of the most important loves to live through. I think I'd also have to say that whatever I don't understand is really lovely in the hungriest sort of way, because it makes me pedal uphill, especially for the kind of soup or bread I've come to crave. And to be honest, I'd also have to admit what I've known all along, that for something to really float or glow or leave love in me, it has to be out of place, in an understood only afterwards sort of way. And now, TA, I'd love to invite you to read a couple of poems.
Thank you, Hiram. The poem Tin Roof first appeared in North of Oxford. It's all about the befuddlement called adolescence. Tin Roof. When I was 17, apples were busheled in baskets, and I was the straw under all of those red, round spirits. All the light coming through the shed's planks was slanted across them, and every wasp in the world hovered just above them. Yes, whatever apples were, I wanted to be. And in a way, when I was 17, apples ate me. What was to become my heart was really some wild, weedy patch in the orchard back then. And any sheen reflecting off their skins or the barn's tin roof was all that I wanted to be. When I was 17, with every seed buried deep inside, even my gangly gaze was humming. And somehow I knew before tasting anything tartly sweet that that was what I wanted to be, right there in the baskets. And this next poem, In the Next Room Over, first appeared in Hedge Apple. The poem has special meaning for me as it brings to mind holding my mom's hand at her dying bedside this past April. In the next room over. I'll bet you whatever you want that she won't make it through the night. And that's not being dreary. That's just being honest. So anything out loud she says, pay attention to, but especially do if you hear her coughing, or if you smell doom in the hay, or hear water gushing down drains, because she's preparing. Trust me, long, long ago, when things were as simple as that finger in your ear, she was a goddess, like smoke is in fall. She was as pure as poured milk, or the fullest of apples. That was then. Now, the situation is a gaspy fish, and the need to avoid and look away is deeply with us. But oh, will you just look here at this little frame? There we were once, posed under a tree, lined up like sparrows. She was the robin. So I tell you this with my heart for my throat. A cool, damp word is the least and most we can do for her now. Okay. Well, Hiram, these poems we've just read are pretty typical of what's included in Mud Ajar. Where did they come from, and where, oh, where do you want them to go with the reader and listener?
Well, first off, TA, you read those poems beautifully. My goodness, they are proud to have your voice performing them and narrating them. In terms of where these poems came from, many, not all, but many were written during the pandemic with really a gratitude, a deep gratitude for what I guess I would call the natural world. Almost in spite of, or maybe really because of the lockdown and the rough headlines that we all experienced, I was nonetheless giddy with an amazement of looking as I stepped out onto the porch and scanned the never changing, constant, but always changing, fascinating trees and sky. To say all that just a little bit differently, being alive through these hard times and being able to savor the dawn, being lucky enough to come fully awake to the morning, was where many of these poems began. So TA, let me switch it around here. You've narrated several novels, books, nonfiction, and the like, but Mud Ajar is the first collection of poetry that you've narrated. Any thoughts about the kind of the special challenges or surprises or even satisfactions
Hmm.
of narrating a book of poetry like Mud Ajar?
Oh, well, it definitely was a different experience than any I've had thus far. With nonfiction, it's pretty straightforward. The challenge with fiction, if you have multiple characters, is that you have to create different voices, perhaps different ages, genders, etc. But with poetry, poetry has its own special structure, and it also has the author's own personal flair, and it's not always that easy to interpret what is meant. And so, in especially with a creative poet like yourself, Hiram, where you're mixing up parts of speeches and using adverbs for nouns and verbs for adjectives and such. So, in reading, in trying to interpret what the author's intent is, which is what I do with every book I read, it was challenging to try to grasp what is it that the author is trying to get across here, and what would be the best way to bring that to the reader. So the really good part about that is that it increased our collaboration. We interacted so much, and you were so very helpful in establishing, the tone and everything about the book, that this was, again, my most enjoyable project to date. Number one, I didn't have to do any editing, which is a first. And number two, I feel so grateful, that I was able to participate on this project, because as I've read the poems over and over, they have grown and they've become a part of me. So I thank you for this opportunity. The main difference, again, was the level of collaboration needed with the author, and the joy of just taking these poems in.
It's been such a pleasure to, as I said at the beginning, hear you enliven these poems with your voice. It's just terrific. It's a special treat for me to hear them. So speaking of hearing you read some poems, let's hear you read just a few more.
Okay, thank you. It is my pleasure. This next poem, Age's Ears, is a poem that sounds kind of giddy with joy. At least that's the effect I'm trying for. Age's Ears. Oh, my friends, of all we may, this wonder seems so colors wishing I-ward. And oh, my friends, as if we could, to ever blessed such sounds, of where to when, of seedling dreams, we and grateful. My friends, and oh, as if we surely must, amazement here, and living in with what may be, with vast to do. This now, my friends, and why, and oh, and how, such apple sacks that give us these ages' ears, our oh in telling others of this where and more, these listening founds for fulling. The next selection, Soup to Nuts, first appeared in Affinity Collab. It's all about the power of that amazing first encounter. Soup to Nuts. The crowd shrank like zip. The room suddenly became just you to me. All background noise crumpled. Even the air swept its hair back. And all of my eyes, head to toes, soup to nuts, in be-bad holy light, zoomed in. And nothing else even twitched. Then and there, I got dug up like civilizations, like age stampeded. And every squeak of melting ice, every clumsy clink of sip, every bit of my fizz coughed and swore with swigging. The next selection, Muddy, is one of my favorites. Or maybe I should say one of my favorites, because so many are my favorites. Anyway, Muddy first appeared in A New Ulster. It wanders around the topic of friendship. Muddy. I wish I could tell which of my friends will be friends forever, and who will just walk off whistling into the woods. Which ones, I wonder, will chance choose for keeps from the randoms? So many slip away without saying much, and others drop off when I throw a fit. And some turn sour soon after ripening. Walls as tall as 65 also make it harder to keep in touch. The starts and stops of friendship are muddy mysteries. So I guess that there's no way to predict who will end up being there after all, waving the checkered flag and grinning. Okay, wow, that was a pleasure reading. Hiram, now would you please do us the honor of reading a few selections?
My ears are grinning from your reading of those poems, TA. Thank you very, very much. This poem was written about these very concerning times. It's titled Succotash. My country, so poly, so jack of all trades and confetti. This yard sale of nations with ditches of weeds and cornfields split open. The tar in my whistles. My country, the talons and scars after oozing. The sparklers, my country, that wake up but ransack what happened, and broad beams that dazzle the mud. My country, all arrows shot heaven with swearing. My country, in sparrows gone haywire and hobo. The screen doors to wisdom slammed shut and gone off to, with maps left behind. My country, these blackboards of silence and misspells. My country, so flies over pie. And this next poem first appeared on the Vox Poetica site, and I read it lovingly in another voice. It's titled Smart Dumb. She was born inside out, the size of a heavy orange. And the story goes that she was wobbly from the very start. Even as a little girl, she was so smart and so damn dumb together. That's the way sometimes. Well, wouldn't you know that dead solved the problem? The full story isn't important. But what is that at about 19 or so, she fell jaw drop in love with someone who just wouldn't, couldn't, and didn't. Someone like too close to a fire. Yes, with those kind of eyes. And the thing was, there was no wanting her at all, not any. And oh my goodness, the rumors were rich enough to live on. But here's the thing, really. She ended up like a tree toppled over with all her roots up in the air. Hers was a big sideways life that just never really got started. And of course, she's gone now, but is wholly famous. That's what starting out with too many wants will do in an all or nothing sort of way. So the lingering question is this: is it truly best to leave nature alone or to invite it in for a chat over dinner?
Oh,
So, Tia,
that was awesome. Thank you, Hiram. It's a joy hearing the poems come from the author. I love it.
thank you, TA. So, as we kind of begin to wind down the program here, tell us a little bit about what you did to prepare to read the poems in Mud Jar. What kind of coffee did you have to drink in quantities, or was there something stronger that you needed to drink to prepare? What kind of mindset did you enter into as you stepped up to the mic?
Well, before even getting to the mic, I've got to read the poems, try to get a feel for the poems, to see in what ways they speak to me, first of all, before even reading them out loud to myself again. And as we've talked about earlier, trying to figure out, okay, this is a was and it's acting as a noun, but so there was a lot of brain power that had to go into it initially. And I don't know, if I didn't have you directly as a resource, it would have been much more of a struggle than as much joy. so so the preparation really was just trying to immerse myself in the work. This is a whole different kettle of fish from everything else that I've done.
Thank you for jumping in and swimming with it. Yes.
Well, you asked me about my process in doing Mud Jar. And, surprise seems to be jam-packed in the Mud Jar poems. So let me ask you the question now. What is this thing about surprise and Hiram poems? I want to ask you about grinning too, but we'll stick with surprise for now. So what is it about that surprise? And surprise us with an answer, if you will.
Well, over the years, the poems that really have meant the most to me have startled me with their unexpecteds. They've grabbed me at what I call their front door, their opening lines, and swooped me through to their ending. And in that whoop, in that swoop, they've changed me. I think of E. Cummings, I thank you, God, for this amazing day, with that terrific line, for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. Those kind of lines for me just, wow, open up the world, and I want to enter it. So my hope, TA, is that at least one or two of the poems in Mud Jar will bump, will carry, or will even jar readers to a new spot, will change them just a little bit. I'm hoping that readers will leave the poem's back door a little bit different than when they entered the poem's front door.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I can tell you from personal experience as a reader that they certainly shifted my axis and pushed me in directions that I hadn't gone before. And as we close, would you please give us one more selection in the author's voice?
Thank you, TA. So, TA, this last poem is the last poem in the book. And I'd like to think that it's as much of an opening as it is a close to the book. It's titled This If. I fly myself as far as can be, like windows do or doors beyond. This reaching sky, these trees of all that's gone or coming to, and rounded beams. I fly as hell open is, and porches swing up to towards, each rhyme undone to tell of fill and full where blue is now. I fly this if, but also more, where clouds love rakes or fields are curls to forever wear, or halos fling my scattered verse this day that rings.
Thank you once again. That, folks, is Mud Ajar and Hiram Larew. Pretty awesome.
Thank you, T.A. Niles, for being here as the narrator. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for joining us for the Art Bar Poetry Series reading of Mud Ajar by poet-author Hiram Larew. You can dive more deeply into the world of Mud Ajar and Hiram Larew at hiramlarewpoetry.com.